Well, welcome to the January 3rd, 2024 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Monroe County. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ms. Nestor Jelen, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Skip Daly.
Here.
Pamela Davidson.
Here.
Guy Loftman.
Here.
Owens.
Here.
Margaret Clemens.
Here.
Okay. We have 4 members in person, 1 online, and a quorum.
And is there a motion to introduce the evidence for tonight's meeting?
I would like to move that we introduce the evidence at tonight's meeting.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to introduce the evidence. I would like to introduce the following items into the evidence. The Monroe County Comprehensive Land Use Plan as adopted and amended. The Monroe County Zoning Ordinance as adopted and amended. The Monroe County Subdivision Control Ordinance as adopted and amended. The Board of Zoning Appeals Rules of Procedure as adopted and amended. And the cases advertised and scheduled for a hearing on tonight's agenda.
Is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve those.
Second.
Okay.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the introduction of evidence. I'll call the roll. A vote in favor is a vote to approve. Pamela Davidson.
Yes.
Guy Loftman.
Yes.
Dee Owens.
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
Skip Daly.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we have no minutes to approve tonight, but under administrative business, even though it says none, at our February meeting, I'd like to announce that we will both have officer elections for the Board of Zoning Appeals, and we will also consider a few rule changes for the operation of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And if anybody else has anything else to add, let me know. If not, I'd like to beg of the people here in this room, when you come to the podium, please make sure that the microphone is adjusted so that we pick up your voice, because the person who does this transcriptions for our minutes is sometimes having difficulty hearing us, and we're not getting any younger, so we'd appreciate it. So thank you so much. With that being said, have we approved the agenda?
No.
Oh, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Guy Loftman.
Yes.
Dee Owens.
Yes.
Pamela Davidson.
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
Skip Daly.
Yes.
Okay, motion is approved 5-0.
Okay, well, the first item on our agenda is under old business, and this is VAR-23-42, and this is a Williams use variance to tourist home cabin in Chapter 802 concerning 1.39 acre parcel in Perry Township at 1901 East Luke's Court. And staff, we heard this last month, but if you would review the case with us and any changes to the presentation, we'd be most grateful.
Sure. I also wanted to make an announcement of the approved BZA meeting dates for 2024, just for everyone's edification. I can also send this out, but it will be the first Wednesday of each month, with the exception of July 10th. That's to avoid the 4th of July holiday, and then August 28th, and that's to work around county council schedules. So I can send that out as well, but just a quick FYI.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so the case VAR-23-42, the Williams use variance to tourist home cabin in Chapter 802. The planner for this is Drew Myers. I'll be standing in for him tonight. The case did fail for lack of majority vote. It was a vote of 2-2 at the December 6th BZA meeting, so it's back here tonight. And then we've also received new support letters submitted to staff and to BZA members, which we've handed out and also emailed to our online BZA member. These letters were submitted after the packet was published, so if anyone would like a copy of those, they are at the side table and you may access that information. And it'll also be on the BZA slide. So I will just keep it brief, and if you have any questions at the end, please let me know. So this is, again, a use variance to Chapter 802. This is to establish tourist home/cabin. The property is zoned suburban residential, which does not permit the use, so they're seeking a use variance to allow the use at this property. There was a prior enforcement case on this property regarding the use of the property for a short-term rental. It was realized that it was being used as a short-term rental only by staff. It was not a neighbor complaint that we received in regards to the short-term rental. It was through another issue on the property that they had, that we found out that the property was used as a short-term rental. So I just want to clarify that as well. So just a little bit of background again, the tourist home/cabin use is permitted in several of the zones in the county ordinance currently, but it's specifically not permitted in the suburban residential zone, and that's a zone that this particular property is in. You'll find suburban residential zones around Lake Lemon. You also find them in other areas of the county. And there's been a discussion at the commissioner's level as to not permitting tourist homes/cabins in this zone in particular when it was put into the ordinance. So in addition to the tourist home/cabin use variance, the petitioner's property does not meet some of the design criteria, including the 200-foot distance from principal use structure. In addition, the property is a little under 2 acres, which typically we see in the rural zones. Tourist homes typically are on larger lot sizes. So just want to walk you through, if the use variance is approved, and that would mean that they would have to meet all the criteria, that they would then need to come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals for design standard variance to condition 48 for all requirements that they cannot meet under the tourist home/cabin, including the 200-foot separation from other homes in the area. They would then be asked to submit a commercial site plan. They would be asked then to acquire a general improvement location permit to change the use of the property from single-family residential to tourist home/cabin. And then at the end of that, we would ask them to submit a land use certificate, which would trigger a site inspection by staff. If the use variance is denied tonight, the petitioner will not be able to rent the space under a short-term lodging agreement, which is defined as less than 30 days. I want to remind you of the standards 812-5 for a use variance, A through E on the screen. In addition, what we're looking at is hardship or unnecessary hardship, and that includes that the property would effectively be deprived of all reasonable economic uses of the parcel. So currently the parcel is used as a single-family residence, but they would like to add a tourist home/cabin use to the property. So here's the location of the property in Perry Township and an aerial overview of the property. They're not proposing any new development. This is already an existing space that they would like to rent out over an attached garage. And here is the area that they would like to utilize as a tourist home/cabin, circled in yellow. And then here are the photos from the vacation rental site that they currently have posted. They've taken the ability to rent the space down, but the photos still remain online. So we're utilizing these for purposes of review for the BZA. And here's the petitioner letter. This is the building permit and the prior enforcement case from 2021 asking them to cease and desist the use of a short-term rental, which to date they have been able to do. Although tonight they're asking for a use variance to allow that use to occur on the property. And then the new letters of support, which are at the back table, but also on the screen, are from adjacent neighbors. So we received 3 letters of support from East Luke's Court, also the neighbor directly to the west, and East Railtown. Sorry, we received 4 letters. 4 letters in total of support. So the staff recommendation for this is denial, in part because we don't believe that all 5 criteria are being met per the use variance criteria. So I can take any questions that BZA members may have at this time.
Do members of the Board of Zoning Appeals have questions for staff? I can't see if Dee has her hand raised. I'll start with one question, and it's a reiteration of the question that I asked the last time. And there's nothing that prevents Mr. Williams from renting the apartment on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis, correct?
So I do believe that there are criteria for utilizing the site as a 2-family dwelling, and I
Yes.
believe that it is permitted in this zone.
I see. So are there other questions for staff from the Board of Zoning Appeals? Ms. Davidson?
My question is factual. We know Mr. Williams lives in the primary residence. To comply as a tourist home, does he have to stay, does there have to be someone in the primary residence that's the owner or something like that, and then the secondary resident, you know, what he's looking for the short-term rental on? Will he have to continue to reside in the primary residence for this to operate as a short-term?
No, and that's actually, this is atypical, I would say, for tourist homes / cabins. Typically, we're looking at entire homes being converted for short-term rental use. So having him reside on the property, that is something that's not typical. Now, if the BZA grants a use variance for tourist home / cabin on the property, and let's say they sell the property down the line, I wouldn't think that they would be permitted to have 2 rentals on this property, like one in the home and one over the garage. Typically, we've interpreted the ordinance to mean that they are only permitted 1 tourist home per property.
Good to know. And he did say in his letter that it will help him continue to reside in his home now that his wife has passed away. We did see that in the submitted materials. Okay, thank you.
And this use variance will run with the land, so it's not just for this particular property owner.
Good to remember, thank you.
Mr. Daly?
I have a question for staff. Would there be any other classification other than tourist home cabin that would allow this use?
There's a bed and breakfast use that must be operator occupied, and we did address that with the owner, and they were not interested in the offering like the breakfast side of the use. They wanted it to be more sort of independent rentals occurring and more hands-off, I believe. But that could be a question for the petitioner as well.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Lockman?
You may have covered this, but who put this unit above it? Is it the current owner or a prior owner?
Yeah, I believe that it was the current owner. The building permit that we had listed on the screen here, this is from 2015. So I will double check that, and the petitioner may be able to confirm that. Oh, it does say that at the time Ronald Williams was the owner. So yes, it was Ronald Williams at that time in 2015.
Yeah, he said in materials that that he built it for his, I believe, son to live there, but his son has moved on.
His daughter and her husband.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the petitioner or the petitioner's representative. Mr. Williams, if you would like to come speak, you have 15 minutes between you and anyone else who will be presenting the case to us tonight. So would you please raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I don't have a lot to say. My property is a little bigger than what the thing shows because I bought an extra quarter of an acre behind it. And it's deeded to me, but it doesn't show up on the current deed, I don't guess. So, but I do have a copy of it. And I know Jens was concerned about people coming in and out of there. I have a management company that took care of it, and they had a fairly high price. I think as cheap as it could be was $250 or $300 a night with a 2-night minimum, and it brought in, you know, a higher class of people. And a lot of them came to visit with their kids here in school, or for a reunion, IU thing, or visit the lake, or hiking, and just come to visit the area. And I did go to all of my neighbors and talk to them. In fact, some of them are here tonight too. So I don't know what else.
It's a beautiful place. So I would like to ask my colleagues here if they have any questions for you.
Is it rented most weekends or during the week? Can you kind of tell us the activity level?
It's just on the weekends, and it's not every weekend. But, and you mentioned about if I was going to stay residing there, and I would like to, and this helps me pay my bills, so.
Mr.
Anyway.
Daly?
I do have a question for the petitioner, but I'm going to prequel that if it's okay.
Yes, yes.
For the question for staff. Originally, the living space was built to house family members, it says here in the, would that have been a violation of the use, or would have that been acceptable?
So I think that because it was applied for as a single-family residential unit, that's how it was issued. Upon construction and view of the exterior entrance, I think it may have become more accessible via the outside for the Airbnb use, or maybe more advertised for the outside entry. The way it's built out now and the way it looks now, we may have considered that on second review as a 2-family dwelling, which is permitted with some conditions.
Okay. Okay. So it would have been able to been molded into the code, but at this point, because of the modification with an external entrance, that is one of the tipping points?
So a 2-family dwelling unit is defined as 2 separate units that have separate entrances, separate families living in it. So if they're utilized as 2 separate dwelling units with an exterior entrance, and there's not really utilization from the interior main residence into the addition where the other dwelling unit resides, it would be kind of more into the 2-family dwelling unit category.
Mr. Daly, I believe too, the primary difference is short-term rental versus longer term.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I'm trying to lead this to see if there's an economic claim here of that would fall into the need here, the criterion. I'm trying to see if there's an economic hardship here. If this was built for this purpose, it's no longer that purpose. If there's a debt on this, we're trying to understand here if this can fall into the criterion. And economic hardship seems to be the major stumbling block at this point.
Right. Originally, it's connected to the house. There's stairs from inside that goes up into the apartment. And like I said, my daughter lived there, and then she got married and moved. And since then, we built stairs on the back and a deck to for an entrance on the back. And so that's how it works now, so.
Is there an economic need to have this income? Is there a hardship present that we can apply toward the criterion? I'm trying to help.
I feel that way because I'm almost 70 years old and I can't work a lot more years. And so, and my retirement income is not much. So that's what I was relying on when I thought about doing this, so.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Mr. Loftman?
Assuming we move forward, as I understand it, if you add your second lot and put those all in the same deed, then you would have would we be in compliance, if I might ask staff, if we added them together? If he put his second lot on and combined the deed so it was just one lot, would that bring him into compliance
I see.
with the minimum size restriction?
So the size restriction for the tourist home says that the lot must meet or exceed minimum lot size requirements for the zone.
Yes.
He does. Deck outside, is that correct?
Yes, that's bolted on either side too, so.
But it could be opened up in
Oh,
a
yes,
future
it
date.
can. It
Yeah,
just,
yeah, but
'cause
right
when-
now you have it shut off from the rest of the house.
right, that way, when there's somebody there, they can't come in my side or I can't go in their side.
Right. And I see Ms. Owens has a question. Her hand is raised.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was going to comment about it has supposed to be, as was said, it's supposed to be 200 feet from the neighbor, and the actual measurement is 154 feet. That's like, it's not very much difference. And all of the letters of support that came in on this demonstrate to me that none of the neighbors are too worried about this use.
Thank you, Ms. Owens.
And the house that is that close is Mrs. Gilquist, and she's perfectly fine with it. She wrote a nice letter here too, so.
Well, thank you for that. It looks like a beautiful place. My concern has to do with the designation of the neighborhood is not for temporary short-term rental. It's for the growth of a neighborhood. And a short-term rental does lead to a different aspect and community living, but that's my concern. And we will hear from the public, and each person will have 3 minutes to speak. And then if anybody says anything in opposition, you'll have 5 minutes to rebut that.
Okay.
And then we'll vote.
It is on a dead-end cul-de-sac, and there's no more property available there, so.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay, and the Smiths here are with me too, if they want to speak, is that?
Well, they would speak in support of you, I believe.
Okay.
Are they representing you?
Well, they're just here in support.
Okay, so we will hear from them, and they'll have 3 minutes.
Okay,
And so,
thank you.
yes, thank you. And if anyone is here in the room who would like to speak in support of this petition, please come to the podium. And if you've already signed in, I'll just go straight ahead to swearing you in.
I have already signed.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And if you would kindly state your name?
My name's Tom Smith, and I live at 1990 East Luke's Court, which is diagonal across the street from Ron. And so I've owned that property for many years, 8, 9, 10 years, that I had bought the lot there with the intentions to build. We just recently built a house 2 or 3 years ago. Ron built his house 4 or 5 years before that. So I was over at the property, just maintaining property, and had always talked to him. And he had showed me his property during the process of him building. And so the place that he's renting is over his garage. And he has showed me that before, and where his son and daughter were going to live. At the time, his wife was alive, and she really enjoyed him having there. And then when she passed and he started renting it away, he'd come to us before he even done that and asked, hey, I'd like to do this. And he had our support back then when he was doing it. And we live in a real rural dead end. There's 2 roads that dead end with a dead end cul-de-sac. And there's like a 600-acre farm that's all on one side with a wedding chapel on one side. And most of the neighbors know each other. And pretty much we walk our dogs, we walk up and down that dead end road and run into people. And you know when somebody's not there, and we did when somebody was renting it and it was there, they were there for the graduation of their daughter, and they were just walking on the road. Very nice people, but other than just randomly meeting them on a walk on the road, we could never tell when anybody was ever at his house. There was no traffic or any problem like that. And sometimes neighbors talk and they don't always tell the owner what they really want to hear, but from what we've heard in the background talking to our other neighbors, everybody's all for this and really supports the idea of having it. And as far as a downgrade, I don't even see if somebody else moved in there for years to come, how it could really downgrade on a rental, even if they did the exact same thing. I think it would be a plus for the community because there's just not that much there, and traffic interference, and his driveway, the way it's set up, it's kind of set up that it accommodates that 2 different places could be there. So I approve, and I'd like to see it go through.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Or if there's anybody online, please raise your virtual hand, or if you're calling in by telephone, please press *9 to be recognized. Okay, if there's anyone in opposition to this petition, please come to the podium, raise your virtual hand on Zoom, or press *9 to be recognized. So there's no one. So there's no rebuttal. So we will come to ourselves and we'll have further discussion and or a motion for a vote. So Board of Zoning Appeals, what do you think, and are you ready to vote on this?
I'll jump in and
Yes.
say that I think we've heard everything that we need to hear, and oftentimes the neighbors are quite NIMBY, and in this case, the neighbors are all going, "Come on, this is helpful to Mr. Williams," and I support this change.
Are you going to make a motion, Dee?
Well, I didn't want to be the last one to talk. Does anybody else have something to say?
Well, I'm certainly impressed by the support of the neighbors. I had serious reservations, but it appears to. So I'll move to approve on the grounds that it will not be injurious to the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community, the use and value of the adjacent to the property, and it will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. In fact, it would be like the neighbors think. Having that used well is going to make their neighborhood a better place to live and help maintain that. The need for the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property involved, that having space that can be used, which was self-created, but that doesn't
Part of your findings was that the owner is living on the property, which is unique.
Okay, I'll say the owner lives on the property.
And Dee and Pamela?
If that's, yes.
Dee and Pamela, does that meet with
Yes.
your intention to second the motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure does, yeah.
Okay, so, and with that in mind and with the other conditions and that Mr. Williams will have to secure going forward, that this planning staff has indicated that you have to get certain variances for side yard setback, et cetera. With that being said, Ms. Nestor-Jelen, will you please call the roll?
Sure. So the vote is on VAR-23-42, which is the Williams use variance to the tourist home / cabin use in Chapter 802. There's been a motion to approve the use variance with the condition that the owner reside on the property while utilized for the tourist home / cabin use. A vote in favor is a vote to approve with that condition.
And could I clarify that? I like the way you've said that because there'll be one, depending on which side it is. We should be aware that the owner occupied could be the place above the garage and the home could be the tourist home. We ought to be aware of that based on exactly what you just said. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. A vote in favor is a vote to approve with that condition. Dee Owens,
Yes.
Pamela Davidson,
Yes.
Margaret Clements,
Unfortunately, no.
Skip Daly,
Well, I think this will pass, and I'm not disappointed that it will pass. I don't know that this has met the hardship criterion for me to be consistent in my voting and to vote yes. So I have to say no.
Guy Loftman.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is approved by a vote of 3-2.
Well, thank you for coming and thank you for participating in the process, and we'll be seeing you again with the side yard setback request. But you have a beautiful home there and you've done really great work on that, and your neighbors are very nice and you have a nice neighborhood. So congratulations and thank you. Happy New Year. Yes. Pardon me?
Staff is going to
Yes.
follow up with you, yes.
Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we move on now to the second item under old business, and that's ADR-23-1, appeal by Bachelor Heights Homeowners Association of the planning director's issuance of permit R23-898 as it relates to the required setbacks and allowable use. And this concerns 6 parcels at 1470 West Wind Court. And I believe that Ms. Nestor Jelen is going to review this with us. So please continue.
Yes. So we heard this at the last month's Board of Zoning Appeals, and again, this is back in front of you for a failed majority vote. So now that we have all 5 members present, we're bringing this again as old business. So this is an administrative appeal, which is a separate process and separate review than variances or conditional uses before you. So in the packet, you'll see links to the rules of procedure, but basically tonight you have a choice to affirm or reverse or change basically the determination that was made, which was to issue a permit for a 6-bay garage in the Bachelor Heights PUD. So I'm going to just show you a few photos and go over the case since I believe at least one member was not present last month. So this location is in Perry Township in the neighborhood of Bachelor Heights PUD. The plat here, just a little bit, shows the 6-bay garage, so it's very tight quarters in this PUD, but it was a platted location. Each garage bay was approximately 14 by 26 on the outside edges and then 12 feet on the interior, and they're listed as lots U through Z. This is where the garage location was applied for and issued. These other surrounding platted lots have numbers, and these are where residential homes are currently located. So again, the plat is just showing this location of where the garages are to go. So we received an original plot plan accompanying a residential accessory structure permit, which was applied for by the petitioner. It showed in their permit application that they would meet a approximately 8.67 foot setback from structure to structure. There's an as-built later on in the proposal, but essentially the dotted lines here on the screen were the required building setbacks that they were showing that they were able to meet. This is the as-built that was provided by staff. Essentially what was found and not even able to be really picked up by the as-built was that there was an encroachment of this platted location, and that is considered an enforcement issue, that they did not locate the garages in the original location of the plot plan that they submitted to staff for an improvement location permit. So here is the garage that as constructed. So staff went out and did a site visit and found that the location of the garages were not at that 8.5 foot setback, which is what prompted us to ask for the as-built submitted. And then here's a view from West Wind Court, which is how the garages will be accessed. And then the nearby residential units here. So the petitioner letter under Exhibit 8 expresses the appeal reasoning, and under Exhibit 9 as well, there's staff reply in red text. So the petitioner is stating that the reason that they're requesting an appeal of this residential accessory structure permit is because they believe that the use is commercial. They were concerned about the building location per the plat and that there was an encroachment. So focusing on number one, the commercial build within a residential community, this permit was granted as a residential accessory structure permit. Generally speaking, they applied for a residential building permit. We issued a residential improvement location permit, which permits the use and the location of the structure. That was in compliance with both the PUD ordinance and the recorded plat on file. If the garage, once constructed, is to be used commercially, that would be an enforcement action that staff would be required to take on the property. But as of right now, we do take people at their word when they do go to apply for a permit application, and we review the relevant ordinances for that application. I did add a few points in red on page 24 of the packet. So just that there was a discussion about the improvement location permit as noted as a residential accessory structure permit. Though our permits are subcategorized to help us have an organizational method to our issuance of permits, it's just generally under the umbrella term improvement location permit, which is defined as a permit certifying that the site plans of a proposed building, structure, site improvement, or use of land have been examined for compliance with all requirements of this ordinance. And then there were discussions regarding definitions and where do we look for use definitions guiding this development, and that would be under the Highlands PUD ordinance, which I have linked as well. And just a little bit more information about this PUD in this specific area of the PUD, which was approved by the City of Bloomington Plan Commission back in, I believe, 1997. I have the area highlighted in yellow, and that area was intended for multifamily uses, and it's directly west of Bachelor School, and it was intended for about 10 units to the acre with a total of 250 units. So the question before the BZA is whether the permit issued followed the PUD ordinance and whether the plot plan or site plan showing the location submitted to staff originally as part of the permit application, which is R-23-898, met the required standards. Staff believes that the 6-bay garage use is part of the multifamily use and is shown on the recorded subdivision plat. If the petitioner is stating that the use will be residential in nature, we would issue a permit to that effect. If the use is later determined to be commercial in nature, we would follow up with enforcement action. So staff is recommending to affirm the decision to issue the residential permit, but we would also be requiring enforcement now that we know that the as-built is showing an issue with the location of that garage placement. So I can take any questions.
Do members of the BZA have questions for staff? Mr. Daly, do you have a question for Ms. Nestor-Jelen?
I do. First off, this was heard by the BZA previously?
Yes, this was on the December 6th BZA agenda, and it was heard during that time.
Okay. And this is an appeal to that decision?
This is, it was not able to be voted on December 6th,
Okay.
so it got continued.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question. Was there not a county building inspector measuring off on the block foundation?
So the building department does not have as much of a concern for setbacks in the regards of like planning of required setbacks. They do come in contact with setback requirements if, let's say, you know, there needs to be firewall construction or issues of safety when it comes to like fire damage potentially.
So just trying to better grasp the issue. You said, hey, you can do this as long as it's setback this amount of feet. They build the block foundation, building inspector, county building inspector comes out, says, yeah, everything's good, but doesn't take in consideration the setback that the other county department told them that they needed?
So the issue that became apparent was that they were not meeting setbacks, and that was a complaint by neighbors in the development. And so the planning department came out and
After it
did
was
the
built.
measure. Yes, after it was partially constructed. It
So-
only took about 2
Okay.
weeks to construct
So-
this building. Yeah.
County building said, yeah, you're good to keep building. They kept building. After the fact, there's a problem.
I see so is your question, did they
My
have
question is
building
the
inspections?
is the left hand and the right hand not communicating? Is that why they're in front of us today?
Could I interject something that I think came out before?
Sure.
And correct me if I'm wrong. They submitted a plan showing the correct setback would be met, but after it was built, it was discovered that they failed to meet the setback.
That's fine.
Yeah,
One could look at it that way.
yeah,
One could also look at it and saying, well, the county as a whole has folks that should be making sure that that happens.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I
My,
mean,
my question's answered.
yeah. Because has the building inspector gone out there now and given it an okay? Or what happens when the setback isn't met? Does the building come down and the setback is met? Or are they just hoping for forgiveness, or what happens?
So setback regulations are set by the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
So if you all have, like, let's say a side setback variance before you and you deny that side setback variance for an as-built, then you are voting to take action to either change that setback or move the building or take the building down. That's a planning concern. But this is part of a PUD, and so it's platted setbacks. So if they were to want to change the setbacks, it would actually be a subdivision process and an ordinance process. What we're here tonight is to discuss whether the use of the 6-bay garage and the permit that was issued in accordance with that use was issued correctly based on the information that was provided to staff at that time. Now that they haven't followed that, that is an enforcement issue that will be followed up with no matter the result of this BZA hearing. Does
But
that make
what,
sense?
could I just ask, because I am deep in these processes, so how do they amend the PUD to get in compliance? I mean, do they come before the ordinance review committee or the plan commission or the BZA?
This would be a commissioner
A
vote
commissioner vote.
to change the preliminary, if the ordinance laid out exact setbacks, it would be an ordinance change. If it's just the plat that we're discussing, which I believe the PUD ordinance delegated authority, and the plat was what showed the actual setbacks. So if they need to change the platted setbacks, it would be a preliminary plat amendment, possibly, or a final plat amendment, which may be plan commission decision, or if they're able to not change the amount of open space changing, it may be possibly a staff level, but that's yet to be determined at this point.
What a mess.
Okay. My question for staff is, last month when we heard this case, there was a very big concern about potential commercial activity. Yes, we did. It was two, yes. But has there been any factual changes on any of those particular issues that were of great concern to the association?
I haven't received anything in regards to the commercial use, any supported evidence to that effect. The only thing that has transpired since the last meeting is that there was some work being conducted on the garage, and there is a stop work order in place while this appeal has been filed. And so there was communication between neighbors and the contractors that further work, which was installation of gutters, I believe, was not supposed to be taking place while this appeal was in review.
And I didn't ask this last time, but you would think garages are available for people who are adjacent to park vehicles in. I mean, that's what you kind of think of garages. So has there been any advertisement or notice to the neighborhood of availability of these for rental of the neighbors to them?
That I'm not sure about. I don't know if the contractor is online or if they wish to speak, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Loftman?
My understanding of the building inspector is, and of the inspection process, the construction process, is the owner and the contractors who are working on it are responsible to make sure that it's within the plot, within the acceptable boundaries, and that's, if they do it wrong, they do that at their own risk, and it's not routine for the county inspector to go out and take measurements to make sure it's compliant. That's up to the owner. Certainly the primary responsibility is the owner. Is that an accurate understanding of the normal process?
So we do not have surveyors on staff. We do not go out and survey and stake people's property boundaries. So it is up to the owner and the contractor to be aware of where their property lines are located before they start. And we rely on the information that they provide in terms of a site plan or a plot plan to give us the information that accurately reflects where they will be placing buildings in relation to setbacks. So that is correct.
Thank you.
As a matter of record and as a matter of history, has this builder been out of compliance with similar issues in the past that we know of? With failing to meet setbacks? Is it a repetitive thing?
Specifically as it relates to setbacks, I'm not sure, but I do know of past compliance issues.
I see. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're hearing that. We will hear from the petitioner, Mr. Lambert, or the petitioner's representative. I assume you're already signed in. And are you an attorney, or is it Mr. Densford is? Okay, so I will swear in everyone just for convenience, even though the attorney does not need to be sworn in. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And together you have 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for having us back. My name is Andrew Lambert, and I'm the president of the Bachelor Heights Homeowners Association, along with the petitioner. We're here today asking what's become a quagmire of a situation within our neighborhood for a multitude of reasons. And I know we've already heard other testimony, so I just want to bring up two other talking points and then yield to my colleagues who are here to talk more specifics. But this particular builder has built that has been problematic within our homeowners association in the past. And most importantly, while you cannot enforce the bylaws or the rules and regulations, they have multiple copies that an owner has 5 feet prior to the next building, meaning they have the right to build. We heard testimony from that owner, Randall Johnson, last time, who asked about what's going to happen since he had plans to actually add and improve the outside of his buildings. With that measurement, we are not just a couple inches, folks. We're well into the feet of damages towards him. The second thing, too, is when we were asked why they came out to continue to work on the non-stoppage, they acted as though they didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of confusion. Mr. Johnson actually approached them and said, hey, we have the documentations. Your attorneys have documentations. You need to stop. They are just full of disrespect. They just don't listen. They don't care. This is their property as they see it, and everybody else around it, it doesn't matter. One last comment to note is that the property that is infringed upon was something they built a couple years ago, and we still have an ongoing case where they owe us $6,000 due to flooding because they did not remediate the backside of it. So now there are foundational issues that those owners are facing, along with money that the HOA had to put out there. So I'm going to yield my time to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Mr. Densford.
I'd like just to reiterate a few points that were discussed at the December meeting. Can you hear me all right?
Not so well.
How's
If
that?
you put it up a little higher, yes, thank you,
That
you're
better?
tall,
Okay.
yes.
Um, The the main gist of the concerns by both the homeowners association and the neighbors is the future commercial use. Now, Bachelor Heights has several of these platted areas that provide for garage as an accessory use. The situation, though, factually is distinct in that this is the last of them. So when these lots were, or when these garage lots were purchased, they were part and parcel to other lots within the development that were purchased at the same time on the same deed. The disconnect is that the residential lots subject to be built on are on the other side of the neighborhood. It's over by Gordon Pike. They are not an associated use just based on the lack of proximity. I mean, there's just really a disconnect between the lots themselves, where residences will be built, and these garages on the other side of the development. So the question becomes, they apply for an accessory, residential accessory use permit. What's the accessory use? I mean, they're freestanding. They will be used and managed independently of the lots that are associated with the deed. So the question was raised, well, we accept information from the petitioners as face value, at face value, when they apply for a petition. But it seems in this case a few more questions might have been asked to clarify what the intended use was, or is in this case. Because to describe it as an accessory use begs the question, what is it an accessory to? And there was quite a bit of discussion at the time, and there was presentations by members of the community about commercial use that is frequently a problem in these other garage self-storage areas. The plat that was described both at the December meeting and the amendments, it provides for no commercial use within the area. And so we were asking for some kind of representation that the use of these storage areas, these garages, would be residential in nature. There was some discussion about, if they're rented out, does that change the nature to a commercial use? And the focus, I think, should be on the intended use, not whether necessarily there's money changing hands. So, for example, if the petition, or if the developer were to come forward tonight, either in person or by representative, and make some affirmative statement on the record that these properties will be marketed, will be used by residences within the area for what is typically used, or for what a typical use for a garage, storage of vehicles or boats or personal property, then that would go a long way towards alleviating the concerns that the representations that were made when this permit was issued are accurate. That is, so residential use. Conversely, if there is no such representation, or if the representation is that these will be leased out to the highest bidder for whatever purpose, then that implies the potential for commercial uses, which is prohibited. And I appreciate the comments that the staff will enforce if there is a problem in the future. We're trying to avoid all that. And it can be avoided quite simply by either representations by the developer, or absent that, conditions placed upon, that is, use conditions placed upon the future use of these garages that prohibit commercial use, which would make any kind of future enforcement issue much simpler, much more, I mean, in terms of the burden of proof, it would just be much simpler to be able to rely upon a condition established by this board, as opposed from starting from scratch, trying to prove that residential would be the only permitted use. So we're asking the board to look beyond the four corners of the application to some extent and exact some type of representation from the developer, and failing that, or in addition to that, placing affirmative residential use restrictions on these properties moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Densford. I forgot your name, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sechrist.
I'm a little slow. I think the whole justification for the approval of this permit was erroneous. They said that we were a PUD, a planned unit development. A PUD only exists for 2 years in the development plan. That means this development plan expired in 1999. That was a quarter of a century ago. All right. So in chapter 811 section, it gives you a 3-pronged test on the approval of a PUD permit, or if the structure would have been allowed. Was the permit still the development permit still valid? No, it was done a quarter of a century ago. You had 2 years to build these units, and they failed to do that. Were they applied for before the expiration of the development plan? No, they weren't applied for until 2023. I mean, it just boggles the mind that because 25 years ago we were a PUD, that now we don't have to follow the zoning ordinances set forth by this board today. We could just, oh, it was on the plan in 1997, so we're going to build it. We don't need to worry about the variances. We don't need to worry about that we now have a structure 43 inches away from another home. I'm sorry, it just seems unreasonable that we would say, yes, that's okay.
Are you finished?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, I'll ask my colleagues here if they have questions for the three of you and or of staff.
In reference to Mr. Sechrist's point, when the permit was granted, how did the fact that the PUD was issued in 1990s, that long ago, affect the decision to grant it? I did not realize those were only good for 2 years. That's news to me. So, or does it get grandfathered, or how did that work?
Sure. So once, I'll speak to the current county ordinance. I know this is a little bit more difficult because it was approved under the city planning jurisdiction. The ordinances at that time are very similar to our ordinance right now in Chapter 811. So we traversed, I think, in that testimony, 3 ordinances. So it is very difficult for us to kind of break apart. But the 2-year time limit is that if they do not pull building permits and start the development, then the PUD can expire. So this, it doesn't say that the entire development has to be completed within 2 years. It says that it has to be started within 2 years. So once they started building any part of that site, it no longer triggers the 2-year expiration. That would be my understanding. And Dave can weigh in as well as legal.
Just one moment. Well, Mr. Schilling, our county attorney, will weigh in, and then we'll give you a chance, but just a minute.
Jackie stated that correctly, and I would imagine that development was not, all those units were not constructed within 2 years anyway. So I think that's consistent with what Jackie stated.
And Mr. Sechrist, because he still has time left on his, yes, please, if you would kindly.
My ramblings.
No, you don't, not a rambling.
Yes, so I agree with Jackie in the office. You had 2 years to start construction. But the 3-pronged test of the PUD says, was the development plan valid? No, it wasn't. Were the permits issued inside of the 18 months? Now, it says in Chapter 811 that the commissioners can grant an extension to the building if the petitioner, the developer, had applied for it. No such petition was ever granted or applied for by the developer. So are we just to say that because a building was on the plot 25 years ago that, well, you know, it was there 25 years ago, so it must be good? You didn't have a building permit for 25 years. So I think it would be ridiculous to say, oh, well, you can just do whatever you want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Sechrist. Okay, I'd like to give staff an opportunity to, I mean, my rudiment, yes, Mr. Lofgren.
Let me weigh in
Yes.
too, because
Yes.
I want to get this, my understanding
Yes.
put into the mix.
Yes,
My understanding is that when a PUD is approved, that changes the zoning ordinance. That is the zoning ordinance that substitutes for the normal county zoning ordinance. And they don't have to, no matter when they build, they don't have to comply with the normal county zoning ordinance. They have to build with the PUD set, the requirements of the PUD. And so it's not that they can do anything. It's that they can do anything compliant with the PUD, because that is now the ordinance that controls this development. Have I got that about right?
So when the city council at this time approved this PUD, it became in effect for this development and guided the uses and the platting of this development. Once the development was platted and the development plan was approved, the first time that there was a building permit issued in the beginning of that development, there's no more a 2-year timeline, because if you can think about it, for many subdivisions around the county, it takes decades for those to get built out. So it would be an unreasonable standard to say you're platting 300 lots, 250 units. They all have to be constructed within 2 years. That wouldn't be something that we could administer.
That's not my concern. My concern is that if at the time the city or the county zoning wouldn't have usually let those little lots be built, that's no longer, the general zoning is no longer pertinent to this, because the specifics of the PUD then control what can be built and where, and the requirements.
Correct. Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Lofgren. Mr. Daly, do you have a question?
I do. My question is, you guys are representing the Bachelor Heights Homeowners Association. Has this land been turned over to be ruled by a set of covenants, I would imagine? Is this land, you guys are nodding your head in approval, is that right? Just for the record, yeah, one of you come up, please. And you're the chair
I'm
of
the president of the HOA, and I'm the owner right next to that too as well. So I'm
Okay.
directly impacted
All right.
by this build.
So I suppose my question is, I thought I heard in the testimony that you're concerned about the use of this structure.
Correct.
Do your covenants, because this property is within the covenants and it was turned over, do you not have authority to approve or disapprove these structures and the use? Did this not come to you in advance?
So it's a two-part question. So let me answer the second one first, which is no. We're having discussions with you because of no communication, and that is due to other issues we've had with this developer and builder. They refuse to follow the rules we have. The first question is, yes, we do have a set of CC&Rs as well as bylaws that do explain what this is, and they just ignored them.
All right, so they're, in your opinion, out of compliance of the covenants
Yes.
of this?
That's a yes.
All right, so that brings up a question I have to our attorney. Mr. Schilling, would this not be better suited prior to this appeal to be handled in a civil matter? Because that probably seems like the first step before we should make any decision.
This is the first.
Yeah, I believe under our ordinance and practice is we do not enforce private covenants unless we are listed on the approval document as an enforcing agency. For example, the county might impose a condition upon an approval and say, and we want to retain the authority to enforce that condition, or to, if it's part of a covenant and restriction, to say this is an important covenant, we want the authority to enforce that. But I don't know that that's the case in this situation.
Mr. Daly, may I add one thing to that? Because I know you weren't here for our last hearing, but what was brought up about this was why you guys cannot enforce our bylaws.
Correct.
These developers had copies of it. They knew what our requirements were with this 5-foot rule already, and that should have been part of the conversation they had with your department prior to building.
Okay, maybe I'll ask you this question. If you had your magic wand, what would the solution be at this point
Take
for
it down.
you?
Take it. I'm not even going to let you answer that. It's take it down, because where it's built on a dead-end road, there is no turnaround space. So this is something else we had discussed before too, which means I'm going to use Mr. Loftman's example of a boat. Well, can you pull up that one picture you had of the road itself? You'll notice that it's nothing but trees and green space, and it's built on an angle that, unless you're a professional truck driver, I don't know how you're going to get anything in there without damaging the green space around it, the property lines around it. Does that make sense? So it is built in a way that you can't even use common sense to say, I could be in here. I believe, and I'm going to speak for a lot of my neighbors, we believe that was built with the intent of commercial use and commercial use only. And that is not acceptable.
And if I could just refresh, one of the items that kind of crystallized for me at our last hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, that is that for them, a big difference is perhaps the incorrect application for an accessory structure permit, because that gives them an opportunity for other uses that a residential building does not. Am I correct on that?
There was a question about it being a residential accessory structure permit versus, I think, a non-accessory,
Yes.
like a primary structure?
Yes.
Is that your question?
Yes.
Yes, so that question I think can still stand.
Yes.
I will say that Mr. Lambert's request to just completely remove the building, I don't know that this appeal would lead to that
Right.
end result.
Right.
That's understood, but I'm just going on the record that, they still didn't, I guess I'm going to add to what Mr. Densford was saying is, our concern too is even if enforcement had to come from the BZA, I don't think these people would follow that anyways. And the stop work order that was purposely and ignorantly defied is a great example of that. So even if they came forward and said, no, Mr. Daly, we're going to turn it, I can't take them at their word. They've not talked to us. They've put nothing in writing. And the past behaviors and interactions we've had with them have been lack of professionalism from their side.
I have a quick question. Didn't we hear last time that you're concerned about flooding issues because of the
Correct.
proximity?
Yeah.
And you've said that with their prior construction, there are flooding issues and foundation issues
Correct.
with those units right now still undergoing dispute,
That's
right?
100% correct. In fact, the HOA had to come up with the money itself to remediate it because of the amount of damage the water was doing from that particular build.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Okay, I'm going to check to see if Dee has any questions, because I can't tell if your hand is raised.
No, my hand is not raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the public now and hear testimony both in favor and in opposition to your request. And if there is any negative information, you'll have a 5-minute opportunity for rebuttal. So if there is anyone in the room who would like to speak in favor of this request, please come to the podium. And if you're already signed in, I'll just go straight to swearing you in. Is there anybody from the public who is on Zoom who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Please raise your virtual hand, or if you're on the telephone, press *9 to be recognized. Is it still *9 with this meetings or whatever?
There's no one calling in right now, but on Teams, I believe they have to press on the reaction button, and then there's a raise hand function.
Reaction button. And then what about calling in by telephone?
I will find that out.
Okay, okay. Is there anybody in this room who would like to speak in opposition to the request? Yes, please, sir. Have you signed in yet? No. Okay. Please sign in, and then I'll swear you in.
I am the attorney for the owner of the land and the attorney for the contractor, so I'm happy to be sworn if you'd like me to.
Well, attorneys are, as officers of the court, aren't required to be sworn in. So just state your name and thank you for coming tonight, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Greg Lauer. I represent Joe Kemp Construction LLC, the owner of the real estate in question. I also represent Blackwell Contractors, Inc., the contractor building the garages in question. Bit of background, Joe Kemp Construction purchased this ground, the 6 garage lots, along with 13 residential units in 2020. Since that time, all 13 of those residential units have been built out, and in that time, I have been made aware of no complaints, no litigation, no administrative problems, etc. So that owner, Joe Kemp Construction, improved that development by building those units. After the development was complete with those residential units, Joe Kemp Construction retained 6 garage lot units. They were being assessed at the rate of $580 a year for those individual lots, or $3,500 total annually. They made a decision to build the garages, which are indicated on the plat from 1995. They applied for the permit, which was a residential accessory structure permit, after contacting planning, asking for guidance as to what type of permit to build. The permit was issued on October 16th, 2023 to build a garage that's first indicated on the plat from the mid-1990s that is addressed in the applicable CCNRs from 1997. They built something by right on this ground. Once completed, they intend to use it as a garage, subject to any use restrictions that are contained within the applicable covenants and restrictions. There is no intent whatsoever on the part of this landowner or the developer to use these garages in violation of the applicable covenants and restrictions. We don't believe this is a super complicated issue. We ask guidance as to what permit to use. We applied for that permit. We were granted that permit, and we relied on that permit to construct this. We are 1.5 centimeters into an encroachment. 1.5 centimeters is the width of this eraser. We acknowledge that we are over 1.5 centimeters. We will address that. From our standpoint, the only question we believe is relevant is whether we detrimentally relied on that permit that the county issued. Otherwise, we believe we built what we were entitled to build. And I'm happy to address any questions as you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lauer. I'll turn to my colleagues on the Board of Zoning Appeals if you have questions for Mr. Lauer. Mr. Loftman?
Who maintained that? Do you do you think that the units have to be associated with owners of lots in the PUD?
Absolutely. If those owners choose to rent these units, they're not going to be offered for free. But if they want to come and rent those, then absolutely, they will be entitled to rent those subject to a lease that will be subject to and tie into whatever covenants and restrictions apply to use.
What about people who are not owners? Would they be able to rent these?
The covenants and restrictions make no distinguishment between who can use a garage in this development. Please recognize that these 6 garages are in addition to 21 others already built and being used. These garages aren't being used for anything right now.
If it's a residential accessory use, it seems to me that it should be used by people with residences in the PUD, that would be the only people who could rent these. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree with that.
Do you believe that a person could run a general contracting business out of the garages?
I believe that's currently happening in this subdivision, which is one of the reasons I believe this HOA is attempting to use this permit issue as a guise to somehow restrict the use of these 6 garages, which shouldn't be restricted any more than the other 21. We are subjectively applying standards to 6 of the 27 garages, all that were built by right.
But a general contracting business is a business, not a residential accessory structure. It's operating a business, and in this instance, a few inches from someone's potential living room or bedroom.
Margaret, nobody is operating a business out of these garages. The general contractor was hired to build them.
So any other questions? Ms. Davidson?
Well, we hear loud and clear that the neighbors are very concerned about flooding and about common space use and construction causing issues foundation-wise or otherwise. How can you ameliorate that? And they're also concerned that they haven't been able to communicate with you. That's loud and clear. You've heard that too. So any remedial ideas for how to make better neighbors?
I would be engaged in a different profession if I knew the right way to make better neighbors, and I could probably make a lot of money writing a book in that regard. But the damage that was alleged by the HOA, and I think the number of $6,000 was used, I've represented both the builder and the landowner for the past 20 years. Nothing has come across my desk with respect to this HOA prior to this appeal. So I'm aware of no issues that exist between this builder, this landowner, and this HOA. Now, what they did do in violation of the stop work order, although I think we had means to protect our investment, is put the gutters onto this garage to help ensure that there was no flooding of neighboring units. This developer also went out and built roads in this subdivision that weren't finished by the original developer, in addition to building the 13 brand new residential units, which most likely improved the value for all the residents. This is not an evil builder. This is not an evil landowner. This is just an unfortunate situation where we built by right in what somebody considered their space. Mind you, the covenants and restrictions in this neighborhood specifically exclude these 6 units from common space. It's not common space. It's subject to private ownership. We bought it in 2020. We built after we received permits, 13 residential units and 6 garage bays. So we believe we've done exactly what we were allowed to do and exactly what we were authorized to do.
Thank you, Mr. Lauer. Mr. Daly?
I do have a question for you. I don't disagree with a good number of points that you've made. However, I'm concerned about your definition of residential accessory unit, so I'll allow you to further expand on that.
We didn't,
If it,
oh, go ahead. I'm
if I
sorry.
may, if it's being leased to or rented to by a corporation, I assume there's a corporation set up or a property management set up in some way, shape, or form that will be renting this for $530 or whatever number you mentioned earlier. If you're renting this out, would that not be the definition of a commercial unit?
I don't know if I agree with that. I have rental properties in and around Bloomington, and I rent those to folks, individuals, families, and because I rent them and because I'm generating income does not necessarily make them commercial properties. They're still in residential neighborhoods subject to residential rules.
Do you not have a commercial, on the properties you mentioned, do you not have a commercial insurance policy on them?
If I own them in an entity, I have a commercial insurance. If I own them myself, I have an individual policy.
Right. Well, I think that's where the definition of residential versus commercial comes into play, which is why I'm not so certain that your definition squeaks by the muster of the code. That's all.
Well, I don't think this is a definition discussion as much as it is we checked a box as to what was the most appropriate permit to use. We really had no choice. It was either a residential accessory improvement permit or it was a commercial. A commercial permit will not fly in this subdivision. We built garages to be used as garages. That's what they're going to be used for.
So you will lease them commercially with the intent of them being used for residential purposes is what I'm hearing.
We cannot allow folks to reside in these as a residential purpose. They're going to be used as a garage. Now, around Bloomington, I'm aware of folks residing in garages.
Well, that's
but that's not going to happen here. Right. At least it's not going to happen as far as we're going to allow. We're going to attempt to earn money by way of our investment in this ground by leasing these garages first to folks within that neighborhood. If that doesn't work, we will use those for our own purposes in the interim, but we're not going to lease them for the idea of running a business out of the garage. Now, is that happening in this neighborhood? I suspect it is. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be here tonight. But we're not running any business out of these garages at this point, nor is that our intent.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Ms. Owens, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. So I will turn now to the other members of the public. If there's anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal and this request, please make yourself known by coming to the podium.
Thank you.
Pressing the reaction button, which then allows you to raise your hand. If you're on whatever it is, the platform.
It says that currently if you call in, there's not a way to raise your hand, unfortunately, on the Teams app. Yes.
Okay.
But there was no one calling in at this point.
Okay. Well, this is unfortunate. I like the old platform better. I turn then back to the petitioner and the petitioner's representative. You have a 5-minute rebuttal period. Thank you, Mr. Densford.
Well, is that all right?
Yes, that's great.
I appreciate Greg's final comment that neither Mr. Kemp's organization or Mr. Blackwell's organization had any attempt or had any intent to lease for commercial purposes. That's music to our ears. But that is balanced against his prior statement, in that if they cannot find residences, neighbors within Bachelor Heights to rent these garages as uses that would be accessory to their homes and their residential uses, then Mr. Kemp and Mr. Blackwell's organizations will use those spaces for their own business purposes. They run construction businesses. So we're talking potentially about the storage of construction material. We're talking about being used as staging areas for picking that material up, dropping it off. These typically are very similar to the activities which were described in very offensive terms by the neighbors. I mean, these crews, they show up in the wee hours of the morning. They load things up. There's noise. There's congestion, and it is very much a commercial construction use. So he squeezed that into the two statements about renting to neighbors and no intent to lease for commercial purposes. He talks about building by right. We're not talking necessarily about the construction, we're talking about the use. And we believe that the use should have been examined before this residential accessory permit was issued. The question should have been asked, what is your intended use? And if the explanation was, well, maybe residential, perhaps commercial, whatever we can use it for the highest return on our investment, if that was the answer, they very well may have been directed to the commercial permit, which likely would have been denied based upon the residential nature of this area. Comment was made earlier too about the declarations, covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Bachelor Heights. These were drafted some years ago. They do not describe these garage units as lots. They don't put the same restrictions on them as lots, but they are subject to the Architectural Control Committee in terms of what will be built there and what it will look like. And that, I believe, is what Mr. Lambert was referring to when he said there was a general lack of communication, a disrespect of the authority of the Homeowners Association. So the Bachelor Heights Homeowners Association is not asking this board to enforce its covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It's asking this board to enforce the zoning that is the residential zoning that's applicable to this area. And again, I go back to a point we made before. We don't have a clear, definitive statement by either the owner or the developer or the contractor that residential use will be the exclusive use for these garages. And so we would ask a condition be placed on this project, if this permit is to continue, that commercial use, as it's defined in your ordinances and your rules and regulations, be prohibited in these 6 garages. We're not talking about the right to build. We're talking about the prospective commercial future use, and we're trying to eliminate that problem before it presents itself.
Thank you very much. Do you have a question for?
I have a question for you, Mr. Densford. It's my understanding that the 6 garage units are not being used right now. They're empty. They're not finished. The picture we saw didn't have doors on them. Is that all true? They're not being used. So what you're saying is that the attorney has just said to us that they're going to offer them first to the residents in that area to rent as garages are used. But in your comments a few minutes ago, you said something about materials being stored and access in and out. That is not happening in these units right now. You just fear that could happen because it's a construction business. If I got that right?
We fear it could happen because
fear.
it's happened in other areas.
And because of the actual permit that they applied under and were granted. The actual permit that was applied for.
The construction is not finished. So the use can only be defined in terms of what was presented in that residential accessory permit. There's really not much detail other than the word residential within that permit. So we're asking for a bit of protection from an impermissible commercial use.
Okay, any further questions for staff on that, or Mr. Schilling? Or,
I have a question for staff.
yes, Mr. Daly?
The attorney for the developer held up a bracelet and he said, this is the amount of space that we're over. It looked from your drawings that we were talking about 4.5 feet. He seemed to feel, maybe I misinterpreted, he seemed to feel it was the distance of the width of this pen. Can you shed some light on your take?
Sure. No, I think that is correct. They're over just that minimal amount. What I was expressing was that the application that we were given was showing that they were going to actually meet an 8.6 foot beyond what was the required setback. They were going to show an 8.6 setback building to building.
Okay.
And then when we went out and measured, it was 4.5.
Is there an enforceable issue with that? Even though, if they were to correct, as the attorney mentioned, I'm a testimony here, so I will assume that that's the case. He's going to address that, whatever that means. If he addresses that, will that satisfy no further enforcement?
So if they were to, say, shave off a portion of the side of the building to meet the required setback, and then we would just ask that we would get an updated plot plan that was supposed to be submitted with the permit. If it still meets the requirements, it could technically still have been built and still be standing where it is.
All right. Fair enough. I think that clears things up for me.
How about for you?
Well, I know what I think should happen,
Yes.
and I'm just not sure how to express it. But maybe it can be expressed. I'm not moving this yet. I'm just looking for whether this is sensible, that the decision of the plan director is affirmed subject to the following condition. The garage lots platted U, V, W, X, Y, and Z shall only be used as residential accessory structures. In order to achieve that requirement, those garage lots are only to be utilized by owners of residences in the Highland PUD and are not to be utilized for any commercial purpose.
Is that a legal stipulation, Mr. Schilling?
Yeah, that I do not know because of the language of the PUD that was approved. I don't know that there's anything that requires it to be utilized by residences in that development. If it is required, then that would be fine. The requirement that it not be used for commercial, I think, is covered in the actual PUD ordinance as well. So that would just be icing on the cake in that regard. But I just simply, this is an old city approval, and I haven't seen all the documentation to see what limitations they may have placed on the use of those garages, other than the fact that it needs to be residential in nature.
Can the homeowners association rules and regulations and as they evolve over time, can they trump, so to speak, the PUD?
It's a civil matter.
Yeah, that would not be something that the county would get involved in.
And with all due respect, Ms. Lofton, I don't know that it's our job to put an extra exclamation point on what the PUD already states. If it says it's for the residential use and it defines that, if we approve this, we approve this. If we don't, we don't. But I don't.
Well, my theory of why this is appropriate is if it's residential accessory, then it has to be accessory to a Highland PUD residence. Otherwise, it's not part of this. But
if I live 2 neighborhoods over and don't have a garage, I would not be able to rent that after it was offered first to the folks of Bachelor Heights. That doesn't sound like it's the Board of Zoning and Appeals job to determine that, and I don't know that that's.
Well, let me, and this is a discussion here at this point. I am more concerned with clarifying that it cannot be utilized for commercial purposes than I am saying it's limited to the owners of the Highlands. I think that makes sense, but I don't think that the key concern of is that it only be rented to Highlands people. Their key concern is that it be commercial. And in order to, I could amend that to say, in order to achieve that, or the growth lots are not to be used for any commercial purpose. That means,
No, yeah.
That means you can't rent it out to somebody to run a any business.
A storage business.
A storage business.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to address what people need and not worry about things we don't need to address by making that.
Well, I don't think we need to address that. I think we get into legal complications. What if somebody that is a resident of the neighborhood has a widget making business and wants to rent it out to put their widget supplies in there?
I would say
that's commercial.
That's commercial.
Right. And why could that not be? That's not our boards to decide. The definition of the commercial is already stated in the PUD and in the code, and I think
so
we're good.
Are you saying that the widget storage would be okay?
I'm saying that's not ours to determine.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Schilling and then D. Owens.
Oh, go ahead,
D, you're recognized.
Thank you. By affirming the administrator's decision, we've already said that this is a residential accessory unit. So we're restating the obvious. We've heard the testimony. We've heard the fears of the homeowners association. We heard the lawyer representing the builder address those fears. It's in the public record. And I don't see that there are, if indeed something is done that's against the HOA rules, then that is up to the HOA itself to deal with, probably through the courts, but not through this body. I have to agree with Skip 100%, and I think that barring anything else, that we should move on.
And thank you, Ms. Owens. Mr. Schilling?
Well, I guess that you stand in the shoes of the administrator and are able to make any decision that the administrator makes. And this may or may not apply, but it says the administrator may condition approval on the receipt of other permits, certificates, or approvals. And I don't know if you could consider it a condition, but to say no commercial use unless you obtain a outline plan approval that authorizes commercial use. That may accomplish what you're interested in without changing things at this point.
You said something that unless you could get an outline plan change, that would have to go through the county commissioners.
Correct.
Yeah. And if they get that, then, so I don't. So I don't hear anybody.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just turn it off.
Okay.
My phone is smarter than I am.
Well, I have my iPad here, so my phone was silenced, but my
yeah.
iPad,
There you go.
sorry.
Rascals.
Okay. It seems everybody is in agreement, including, or almost including, the owners and builders, that this has to be a residential purpose, that whoever occupies it has to be occupying it in association with the residents and in association with a residential purpose. If you have a woodworking shop because that's your hobby, you can put a woodworking shop. If you put your kids' foosball tables and ping pong tables in there, that's fine. But you can't rent it out for any commercial purpose. I don't hear any. Does anybody disagree that that's the gist of the restriction that we're considering?
Yes, and I'm familiar with the area. It's not a prime commercial location.
No, that's.
And I'm sure they're not outfitted, garages are not outfitted to operate any kind of business. So I'm less concerned with that. I am concerned, however, with that bracelet width that needs to be addressed. Okay, eraser.
Yeah, well, having considered this as much as we have, I am prone to say that the decision is subject to the following condition. The garage lots are not to be utilized for any commercial purpose. I know that may be redundant, but I think that's what needs to be clear for the homeowners association and for the owner and contractor.
I find that not only redundant, but also repetitious.
Well, you got me on that. But I'm a big believer in redundancy. So does anybody have a motion they want to make, that they're ready to make? Okay, I move that the decision of the plan director is affirmed subject to the following condition. The garage lots platted as U, V, W, X, Y, and Z shall only be utilized for commercial purposes.
Was that the opposite of what you intended to say? That it shall only be used for commercial?
Shall not be utilized for commercial purposes. I said it exactly wrong.
And do you need to reference this?
Yes.
I'm just having a hard time with the question of, is that adequate? Is that an adequate stipulation as far as commercial? Does that cover subleasing? Does it cover subleasing for storage units? Or is that not, is subleasing for storage units a commercial endeavor?
May I suggest that instead of speculating, I think these neighbors are going to be watching this operation like a hawk. And I think that if there's any commercial enterprise, enforcement will hear about it very, very quickly. Because operating a business, we could sit here all day and say what is permissible and what is not, because we all use storage in different ways. All of us do. So you've made a motion?
Yes.
Have you made a motion?
Yes.
And you've already told us that the non-commercial use is part of the regulation, but it seems comforting that we express that it not be used in a commercial manner as an operating business. I'm going to second that if that's the motion.
And let me restate it because I said it backwards.
And before you do that, may I also ask, do you want to put something in there where they're required to deal with that setback?
I think that's a separate matter, that they're going to have to apply it for an as-built, and that's not pending before us. Am I correct?
Is that not?
We are going to be addressing that as an enforcement issue, no matter the outcome of this BZA.
Okay,
result.
so
Yeah.
neither here nor there.
Yep. it would.
They're going to feel the brunt if they don't? Okay.
So I'm going to restate the motion. The decision of the plan director is affirmed subject to the following condition. The garage lots platted as U, V, W, X, Y, and Z shall not be utilized for any commercial purpose.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to affirm the director's decision, ADR-23-1, with the condition that the garage lots platted as U, V, X, Y, and Z are not to be utilized for any commercial purpose. Is a friendly amendment, do you want me to add what Mr. Schilling mentioned, was that unless an outline plan amendment is achieved? Or-
Sure.
Okay. All right. Okay, and that second still stands, Pamela?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so a vote yes is a vote to affirm the director's decision for the issuance of permit R-23-898 with that condition. Pamela Davidson,
Yes.
Margaret Clements,
Before I vote, I just want to make a statement, and I normally don't, but when these PUDs come in, I feel that there's a great deal of bait and switch going on, that the builders come in and they build the single-family homes and the residents are happy, and then little by little, the things that nobody really wanted to live by that they were hoping to escape, like apartment buildings and kind of unattached garages, one by one, until everything they enjoyed when they bought the home in the neighborhood, it is evaporated. And I'm really opposed to this. I don't think it's fair to the homeowners. And I think that something has to be done to secure people's investment in their treasure and property so that there's more informed consent and that there's not as much of this kind of bait and switch. These PUDs, I also believe, need an expiration date so that the people who live in the neighborhoods have an idea of when they can breathe deeply and enjoy the space that they live in. And I know that we're all here, but I would like us to factor that in our CDO and in our future. And this PUD was approved by the city. And we've been dealing with this one mess after another for years now. And I don't think it's fair to the people who invested in that neighborhood. I just don't think it's fair. So, but with that being said, and with the stipulation of the homeowners association and Mr. Densford and Mr. Sechrist that they would like to have conditions placed on the future use of the garages, I believe we met that request, that humble request tonight. And so I will vote yes, for this. Thank you.
Skip Daly,
Hate to follow that up, but yes.
Guy Loftman,
Yes.
Dee Owens.
No.
No. Okay, so the vote is affirmed by 4-1.
Okay.
I
Yes, Mr.
call for a 3-minute recess.
Yes, Mr. Daly. We'll have a 3-minute recess and we'll reconvene. And thank you for coming in. Thank you. I just don't, I
Wires are.
I
They,
know.
they're,
look, look.
look at this.
This
Yeah,
is
put
really
them in
bad.
between.
No, there's a whole huge
Right.
box here
I
in the
keep
middle.
wanting to kick them.
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah.
they're a death threat.
Is your daughter
Yeah.
doing okay?
She's doing homework.
Oh, she's back
isn't
there?
she? Doing homework.
Hi, Alex. Okay, great.
Homework.
Okay, so we're going to reconvene our meeting, and we're going to proceed to new business at 7:30 now. And this is two variances, VAR-23-44A and B, a Snyder minimum lot size variance to Chapter 804, and a Snyder rear yard setback variance to Chapter 804. And this concerns 2 plus or minus acre parcel in Bean Blossom Township at 7342 North Red Hill Road. And Mr. Smith, if you would kindly review this with us, we'd be grateful.
Absolutely. So the purpose of these requests are to build a new single-family residence on a 2-acre size lot in the Ag RR zone, and to bring into compliance a residential storage structure that is encroaching into the rear yard setback. So the petition site, as mentioned, is Zone Agricultural Rural Reserve. This means that it has a minimum lot size requirement of 2.5 acres. The current lot size is 2 acres, and the rear yard setback for this zone is 35 feet from the rear property line. So in April of 2023, the petitioner applied for a residential storage structure permit, and that is noted as R-23-381, intended to be built prior to a new single-family residence. The plot plan submitted showed that the structure met all setback requirements. This permit was issued in May of 2023, and the structure was built shortly thereafter. And then in November of 2023, the petitioner applied for a new residential building permit for the construction of the primary residence and submitted a certified plot plan from a licensed surveyor, which showed the lot acreage and setback information. So the petitioner, as a result, submitted a variance request shortly after being notified by staff that the certified plot plan identified 2 major problems. One, with the structure encroaching into the rear yard setback, and also that the lot was not meeting the minimum lot size requirement. So on the left side of your screen, you'll notice the plot plan that was submitted for the residential storage structure, and I've got kind of delineated as a red square that they are showing the 35-foot setback. And then the image on the right is the certified plot plan from the licensed surveyor. And this is where they've got all of their plans for the property laid out. And then, as noted in the blue circle in the bottom right corner, the surveyor did note that the existing barn was encroaching about 5 feet into the rear yard setback. And then these are just the location and site conditions map. So there are no apparent concerns for where they are proposing to build. They meet setbacks according to the certified plot plan. Steep slopes, not an issue, not in floodplain, so no environmental concerns. And these are just some site photos.
That's a nice blue sky. That's when you love Indiana. Yeah, I love it.
I picked a good day to take photos.
Yeah, you sure did.
So this leads us to the staff recommendation. So for VAR-23-44A, the minimum lot size, staff does recommend approval based on the fact that practical difficulties have been demonstrated that the property cannot meet minimum lot size requirement without a lot line shift or rezone to a zone with a smaller lot size. Staff does recommend denial of the rear yard setback due to practical difficulties having not been demonstrated. And the reasoning for that is that the storage structure was not built in the approved location under the R-23-381.
Okay, do members of the BZA have questions for staff?
Because the structure the storage structure was not built in accordance with the permit. Is that an enforcement issue at this point more than anything else, just like we discussed in our last case?
Yes, and Jackie can interject if need be, but yes, I believe if this is not resolved, it would result in an enforcement issue, yes.
Okay. Anybody else have questions for staff?
I would also say just it would be an enforcement issue if the rear yard setback is denied as well. So they didn't build according to the plot plan they submitted, and they're encroaching in the setback. But if you're able to grant a rear yard setback with the as-built as shown, then we would be able to proceed without enforcement. We would just follow up with the right steps.
That clarifies a lot. Mr. Daly?
Yeah, what's the separation of acceptable and unacceptable in that rear setback once again?
35 feet, your rear yard setback. 35 feet, and they're off 5 feet.
They're off 5 feet.
Of the 35, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So any further questions? Okay, so if the petitioner's representative is here, Mr. Snyder, please come. Have you already signed in? Okay. And if you would kindly raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. So you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing my cause this evening. Obviously, we're talking about two things. Lot size, very unaware that we needed, we would like to have had 2.5 acres. This house, there used to be a home on this property. My wife and I searched, and Monroe County is very short on land. And we found this, we began to love it. I cleaned it up. Tornado had ravaged it in 18. Spent hours and hours out there, and we intend to build, our dream home here. So we are requesting that we could get that variance. Back to the accessory structure. I very much intended to do what I set out to do. My problem was that this area right here still had a lot of woods, and there's an elevation down there. And I somehow lost the sight of the property line from corner to corner. I intended to keep it up here on the higher side here, and stay within the setbacks. It was be, within 35. I was trying to hit the mark.
Yeah.
I actually, even out there, the neighbor lady has another barn that's not far from there. I remember kind of stepping back, seeing that the barns were kind of perpendicular, and I thought I was good to go. And I do build some things, off and on for a living, but I would love to have just a little bit of grace here. If, the barn is completed, it was completed in May. Very beautiful barn. I think you saw a picture, spent time and money on it, but I think if you'll notice, I was truly trying to stay within that. I think maybe 1/20th of the barn is still 31 feet on our property, still 31 feet to our good, but not within the rear setback of 35, which is, which side is the rear? It faces the road, but on this back part of the property, I could have built within 15 feet. This guy, I could have built within, I made a mistake, and I just would love to have a little bit of grace with this little sliver of barn. And I was hoping that is what could happen. I don't know what alternatives would be. There's concrete in the barn. I don't know. I don't feel like my neighbors have objected to this. The lady's very sweet that lives there. I've actually offered to be first in line to buy the 7 acres that she has in the future if she ever gets rid of it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. So.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to my colleagues here, and if they have any questions to ask you, Ms. Davidson.
Well, I think you've answered it for me. So no neighbors have expressed any concerns.
Not that I know of, no.
Do you have anybody closer than that sweet little
No,
old lady?
actually, the land that is in here and over in here, there's 7 acres of undeveloped. She really has, it was a family property of 40 acres back in the day. Slowly, 2 acres here, 2 acres there, 20 acres in the back. She still has 7. Her daughter used to own the 2 acres that we have. We were the third person in there with the attempt to build. But like I said, the land needed tons of work. I was the guy for it. But no, as far as I know, the woman has no, there are no other structures. There's a barn there, an older barn, just there. She comes out and mows, has expressed no quathers with it, so.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions, Mr. Daly, Mr. Loftman, or Ms. Owens? Okay.
Just don't have me build your house.
Okay, so does anybody else who is with you .25 acres at 1350 East Roar Road. And Mr. Brown, if you would review this with us.
Thank you. So the petition site is zoned as State Residential 1, which lists daycare center as a conditional use. The petitioner is seeking the conditional use approval to restart the use of a daycare center at this site. The petitioner's letter references historical use of this site as a daycare center, but has not provided any hard evidence that the use of the property as a daycare center was a legal pre-existing non-conforming use. So as a result, this petition has been triggered. Before I move into the use variance standards, I'd like to define daycare center under the original definition in the original version of Chapter 833, if the board will permit it. This information is included in the packet.
Yes.
The original version of Chapter 833 defines a daycare center as any building or place other than a daycare home where children receive care from a provider while unattended by a parent, legal guardian, or custodian for a period of less than 24 hours per day. The term daycare center includes but is not limited to the following: nursery schools, child care centers, kindergartens, and playgroups, but does not include kindergartens accredited or recognized by the Indiana State Board of Education, which shall be included within the definition of school herein. The term daycare center shall also include facilities defined as child care centers under state law and facilities defined as child care homes under state law, other than those child care homes which are used as the primary residence of the provider. Where required by state law, daycare centers shall be and remain licensed by the state and shall operate in accordance with their license and all applicable state laws. Daycare centers exempt from state licensing requirements shall provide proof of exemption. And now to move on to the use variance standards. Chapter 813, Section 5, standards for conditional use approval. And I apologize, that should be conditional use standards up at the top, not use variance standards. I apologize for that error. The board must find that A, the requested conditional use is one of the conditional uses listed in Chapter 813-8 for traditional county planning jurisdiction, or Table 830 or Table 33-3 for a former fringe for the zoning district in which the subject property is located. In addition to other relevant standards imposed or by or pursuant to this chapter, the standards, uses, and conditions set forth in Section 813-8 are hereby incorporated as standards, uses, and conditions of this chapter. B, all conditions, regulations, and development standards required in the zoning ordinance shall be satisfied. C, granting the conditional use shall not conflict with the general purposes of the zoning ordinance or with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. D, the conditional use property can be served with adequate utilities, access streets, drainage, and other necessary facilities. E, the conditional use shall not involve any element or cause any condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to any other property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards delineated in this ordinance. F, the conditional use shall be situated, oriented, and landscaped, including buffering, to produce a harmonious relationship of buildings and grounds with adjacent structures, properties, and uses. G, the conditional use shall provide a total visual impression and environment which is consistent with the environment of the neighborhood. H, the conditional use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize traffic congestion in the neighborhood. And finally, I, all permits required by other federal, state, and local agencies have been obtained. Here is the petitioner letter, which in addition to stating why they want this petition, also breaks down ways in which they feel that they meet the conditional use standards. And I will give the board a moment to read through this. This information is also included in the packet, both specifically under the ways in which the conditional use standards are answered, and in a more general context, the entire petitioner letter is included in the packet as well.
I just want to chime in quickly on the previous slide. There was a statement about use variance standards. Just to confirm that I think that's a typo. It's a conditional use request. So
yes, that's been pointed out.
Okay. Yes. So let me know when you're finished reading these. Oh, okay. You can go forward, Mr. Brown. I think we're ready. Do you have anything further you'd like to share with us?
I'm just scrolling through the rest of the petitioner letter now.
Okay. We've read them ahead. Yeah.
All right, and here are the location and site conditions map. There's going to be no slope on this area, and it is barely within the Monroe County jurisdiction. Here's the current zoning map of the area and adjacent uses. The area marked NT to the north signifies that that's an area outside of Monroe County jurisdiction, as well as the comprehensive plan. And here is the site plan that was submitted for the use of this petition, for the use of this variance petition, or conditional use petition, I apologize. And here are some site photos of the site itself. And so for staff recommendations, staff recommends approval of the conditional use petition for a daycare center from Chapter 833 and 813 based on the ability to meet the conditions of the conditional use Chapter 813 with the following condition: that the petitioner is to submit a commercial site plan review application and the proposed site plan must meet all applicable standards. As part of the site plan review process, the petitioner must also obtain a letter from the state for licensing of the daycare center prior to the commencement of the use under a land use certificate.
Okay, thank you. Do members of the BZA have questions for staff? No? And I don't see any from D. So the petitioner's representative, Mr. Krugel, have you already signed in up there?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We have time for
I thought
you.
it was okay.
Yeah. Please raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Well, you have 15 minutes altogether to present your case.
Thank you for considering our conditional use application. I am the owner and chief executive for Supportive Community Innovations. We've been serving the community.
Your name, I don't.
Fritz Krugel, sorry. I forgot to add that. We've been serving the community now for over 7 years. We provide services to children and adults who experience significant developmental differences, autism, et cetera. We provide a variety of therapies and services such as ABA therapy, mental health counseling, recreational therapy, behavior support services, and services comparable to respite care as well. We've been wanting to add childcare services to kind of the overall, array of things that we offer the community since we, first started, 7 years ago. And some of the reasons being is we just, want to provide, spaces where, anybody in the community can get that service. We work with a lot of children already who have, significant special needs, but they don't often have, the same opportunities as, other children of that age in the community to, be with other kids in a similar way. So, we felt that, in part because we provide ABA therapy already, we see some kids, in our office locations, and that's a fairly common thing for that particular service. But, we would like to instead at least have, one option being, in addition to just providing childcare to the general environment or to the general community, but also have the space be available for some of the kids that we serve as well, so that they can interact with other kids in their neighborhood. Just like they would if they didn't need our services. And so that's really kind of the thrust, behind us, trying to pursue, getting into, or one of the thrusts, to pursue getting into this space. So, as things have developed for us over the years, we've been able to, move increasingly towards, being able to, pursue this venture. And so, here in the past year, we've been able to make, some moves and, and investing further towards that aim. We brought on a child care director who's here with me today. Her name is Laura Zimmerman. She has all the necessary credentials required by the state of Indiana to serve as the director of the new facility. We have a variety of, personnel and staff who have, a range of different experiences, both with early childhood development, childcare in general, education. We have a psychologist on staff. And, we're just, kind of always looking for ways that we can, further kind of strengthen and expand and improve the quality of the services that we provide to the community. And so this is, one of the next steps on that path for us. We've been looking for a space that we could utilize and, begin setting things up to provide childcare. We came upon this property a couple months ago, I guess. And the current owner is actually somebody that I used to work with, who also is the, owner of another APA therapy entity in town. So that was kind of an interesting, kind of serendipitous, occasion that, brought us together on this potential location. So, but given, that it's been a child care center, for the last, what seems to be like 20 years or so, our plan is simply just to continue with this use moving forward in this particular property. So we're hopeful that we're able to get this conditional use approval so that we can, move forward in that direction. Hopefully it's, it's a little easier since it's already been, serving this purpose, for the past couple of decades or more already. We've also secured services from Spring Point Architects to help us with some updates and renovations to the property, just to make sure that everything is brought into compliance and meets and exceeds, building code requirements, as well as those requirements for licensure as a child care facility as well. And I think I touched on everything for now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that if the people who are accompanying you, if you would like to speak, it's not required. You can. You also, it's up to you. Yes. Have you signed in yet?
I'll sign in real quick.
Okay.
As well.
And please raise your right hand.
Sure.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And state your name and...
Yeah, Tim Ballard.
Yes.
So I'm representing Mr. Krugel in his group on the buying side as a real estate broker.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to speak briefly to, one, the mission behind what this group does, which is meeting a very large and growing unmet need in the community with early childhood care and development. And they do it in a very unique and special way, which I think is exactly why we want to go into this property and continue to do the great work that they do. Second to that is really just speaking to, the real estate market is very challenging in Monroe County. We know this. There's a shortage of a lot of things. So we've been looking for a really long time to check the boxes, and we finally found this place. And as Fritz kind of said, it's almost serendipitous that the woman who currently owns it was somebody he had worked with in the past. So we just kind of see everything aligning, this being kind of one of the final pieces we're just trying to bring together just to continue the great efforts of this great organization. So,
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ballard. And Ms. Zimmerman, do you wish to speak? Are you signed in yet? No.
I am not either.
Okay, so we'll stop the clock for a minute.
Apparently, we're not the best rule followers tonight. Right, fast here. Talk fast.
And please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name and bring this microphone down. And
Laura Zimmerman.
Thank you.
I am proud to be a part of this organization. Monroe County has an opportunity to add to child care provided. There's a lot of red tape and a lot of changes in the state of Indiana right now regarding child care. There are very few opportunities for inclusive child care outside of the public schools in Bloomington, Indiana. And we want to make a difference starting here for children in this community, and we want you to help us. do it by approving this zoning tonight. We will also be, I think, only enhancing the look in the outside of the building and the neighborhood. We're interested in natural materials and an outdoor environment that will not have a lot of plastic and will have a lot of natural elements. So I think it will be a wonderful place for children, and we look forward to serving the community for a long time.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. And do members of the BZA have any questions at this point? Okay, so we don't have questions. I don't believe that Dee has questions. We'll hear from the public, and if there's any opposition, you'll have a chance to respond. Are there members of the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Please come to the podium, press reaction, and then raise your virtual hand on whatever the platform is that we're using, Meets?
It's Teams.
Teams. And I don't think it's possible if you're on the phone to be recognized, right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. If anyone has their hand raised, please make yourself known. Nobody. Is anybody in opposition to this petition? Please make yourself known either by coming to the podium or raising your virtual hand on Teams or some other way. No one. So we come back to us for further discussion and/or a motion.
I'm going to move that we accept CDU-23-4, the Krugel Daycare Center conditional use to Chapter 813 for a parcel located at 1350 East Roar Road.
I second that. Is it Audra Lampkins who is the owner of the property? So I've actually been to that facility, and I think it's great that you're going to continue that, so I'd just like to say that. Yeah.
I just, when I read the petition, I didn't understand that it was part of a developmental disabilities, which it makes perfectly good sense, but I just want to say thank you.
Yeah,
for
thank you.
for having sought out an opportunity to provide child care for kids who must have a hard time finding it and who need it. So that's I'm not sure that's the icing on the cake. I think that's the cake. And anyway, I'm glad you all are doing that. And is it too late to second it?
No, please second it.
I second it.
Okay, please call the roll.
It's been moved and seconded to approve conditional use CDU-23-4, the Krugel Daycare Center to Chapter 813. A vote yes is a vote to approve the conditional use. Skip Daly.
Abstain.
Guy Loftman.
Yes.
Dee Owens.
Yes, and I should say that your camera is gone. I can't see the courthouse anymore.
Thank you.
Maybe it's dark out.
Pamela Davidson.
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
Okay, the vote is approved by a vote of 4 to 0 to 1.
Okay, well, thank you very much and good luck and thank you. Yes. Yes.
There'll be a staff member that's able to answer questions for you in the hallway, if that's possible.
Yes.
All right, thanks. Okay, great.
Yes. Thank you.
Good luck.
Yes, we have one last, is it okay? Okay. There are 4 variances requested at the same time. And if it's possible, we'd like to hear them all at the same time. VAR-2349A, B, C, and D concerning Sycamore Land Trust landscaping variance, off-street parking variance, buildable area variance, and landscaping variance concerning 3 parcels on 113 acres at 6511 North Old State Road 37. Ms. Crecelius, if you would walk us through this, we'd be grateful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So the petitioner is Sycamore Land Trust, represented by Chelsea Moss of Abram and Moss Design Group. Like you've said, they've applied for 4 variances from the zoning ordinance in order to meet site plan requirements. So that is site plan for a commercial or alternative other than residential use. So the petitioner intends to convert the use of the property from agricultural and residential to a use defined as agritourism, specifically as an education center. So the property will be become a nature preserve, and the structures on the property will be used as an accessory to that for education. You can refer to the use determination on Exhibit 3. So we're in Washington and Bloomington Township off of Old State Road 37. Here's a large overview of the site. So 113 acres. The majority of the property is going to be mapped floodway and a little parts of floodplain, but this is mainly floodway. So the petition site is currently an agricultural and residential use. It's zoned Ag and FR, so Agricultural Rural Reserve and Forest Reserve, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as farm and forest. Adjacent properties are zoned similarly. We have agricultural and residential uses adjacent, and then a religious facility to the south. So at this time, a site plan has not been submitted for review by county departments, which would include planning, health, highway, and stormwater, et cetera. So upon submission and full review, additional variance requests could be identified. So just as a side note, generally we like to see the site plan and have a full review. The site is fairly simple. They're utilizing pretty much the existing buildings, so not necessarily predicting anything, but just as a note that these variances are ahead of a site plan filing. So the 113 acres is all former agricultural fields. It contains 1 single-family residence and 2 agricultural structures. So the petitioner states that they are going to maintain the existing wetland area, which you can see has been used as an ag area, but it consistently floods, and they intend to restore the remainder of the property through wetland restoration, tree plantings, etc. So this is just a view of a survey that they provided on their deed, showing that the majority of the property is within a conservation easement, and then a small portion where the structures are excluded from that. So just a few street view pictures of the property. So we're looking at the main residential structure here and a small outbuilding. Just a closer look. So this would be utilized for that education center. And then farther north up Old State Road 37, we have an existing ag building. So the first variance that we're going to look at is number A. This is from the landscaping chapter of Chapter 833. This is specifically for buffer yards. So the standard, the variance is requested is at Chapter 830-7A. The following buffer yard requirements are intended to physically separate and visually screen adjacent land uses that are not fully compatible. So that means, using my picture here on the right, we're looking at the D values. So buffer yard type D is based on, you identify buffer yards based on a table within Chapter 830, and it's based on the use of the site and the adjacent uses. So say, for example, manufacturing adjacent to residential, that's a really big buffer. Here, we're looking at agritourism, residential, religious. The intensity still kicks in a very large buffer yard. So the buffer yard is type D, a minimum of 20 feet, and it requires a D value of 420 feet per linear. So you have to meet 420 D value points of a certain combination of trees, shrubs, ferns. It's the highest we have. So the southwest boundary of the property, just a note, that area is located directly adjacent to a creek. There is some trees and timber there, but the property to the south, the religious facility, is across the creek. We are looking at an approximation of 4,500 linear feet of buffer yard that would be required. So quite a bit of vegetation. Property does contain existing woodlands on site that are adjacent. The petitioner potentially could go ahead and identify those existing vegetation and not have to meet this standard, but we are looking at an extremely large area to look at vegetation.
Yes.
The next one, which I'm skipping a letter, 49D, is also another landscaping variance. It's from streetscape. So this requires that commercial and industrial streetscapes have a landscape strip meet requirements to apply to all commercial industrial zones and all non-residential uses within a residential zone. That's the standard. So now we're looking at the orange letter, the orange streetscape. So we've got 2,300 approximately linear feet adjacent to North Old State Road 37 that would require, again, landscaping, planted landscaping, and then also 780 linear feet along East Wiley Road to the north. That streetscape is required to be a minimum of 5 feet wide. Every 35 feet is required to have 1 tree, 10 shrubs, and 10 perennials, ferns, or grasses. So quite a bit as well there. Okay, jumping back, 49B, now we are looking at off-street parking. This is from the surfacing requirement of Chapter 806. So 806-4D1 states that off-street parking areas, including parking spaces, aisles, and driveways, shall be constructed using a plant mix, asphalt, concrete, porous concrete, or permeable paver systems. That is a slide that's out of order. So they currently are proposing 7,000 square feet of parking area. They're proposing for that to be a gravel surface. On the image on the right, the area highlighted in yellow is the only portion that would be gravel. That's the 7,000 square feet. They are proposing that the drive entrance, the walkways, that those are all concrete. They're just requesting the parking areas be gravel. The zoning ordinance does allow for an exception of up to 4,000 square feet to be gravel when you're outside of urban areas or designated communities, but because it's more than 4,000, a variance would be required to do this large of an area. Staff is, just as a note, staff is supportive of this. It looks like, the direction of the wash off, the drainage of this area, which I have an image, really shows that any gravel wash off is going to go to their same on-site detention. So that's a positive. The fourth and final variance, 49C, is from the buildable area standards of Chapter 804. Because a large portion of this parking lot is technically in mapped floodway. It's considered special flood hazard area. Chapter 804 excludes areas that are special flood hazard areas from being buildable. So any building or structure constructed after October 2nd, 2015 must be located with buildable area. Skipped around a little bit. So the entire site is considered to be mapped. Now, staff did run what we call a FARA, and it's a floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment. It's a kind of a quick spatial analysis based on DNR's elevation data. They're identifying that where the proposed parking lot is probably isn't actually floodway. DNR, Indiana DNR.
Indiana DNR is suggesting that the driveway is the one area that's not.
The proposed parking lot.
Right.
Right. So you can have a mapped area. It's an estimation. DNR in certain places has done more thorough studies. So they have better elevation data, but the petitioner would have to go through a process of actually amending the map.
Which is tedious.
It is. It is a long process, and they certainly could go through that. Without having that done, the map still exists, and it's still technically that special flood hazard area. So there's good there's good evidence based on the FARA that the proposed parking lot that has an elevation of 603.6 and the base flood elevation is 595.9. So that's pretty good evidence that there's probably a 7-foot clearance. But to actually amend the map, they would have to pursue that through FEMA. Okay.
Yet you're still recommending approval?
We are. So we are recommending approval for all 4 variances, A and D from landscaping, B from surfacing, Chapter 806, and C from buildable area. We have listed out certain reasonings. So we recommend approval for the landscaping variances A and D, subject to Highway Department reports. But specifically, we do believe that practical difficulties have been met. We're recommending approval for B from Chapter 806 for surfacing. Specifically, that petitioners propose contours for the off-street parking that would capture any gravel that's washed off during storm or flood events. And then finally, we're recommending approval for 49C from buildable area, Chapter 804, that the Indiana FARA flood plan analysis and regulatory assessment identifies that the proposed parking lot has an elevation of 603 and that base flood elevation is 595. So I know I kind of went through a lot of that quickly. Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Hoffman?
Before I get to the substance, I want to make a disclosure.
Yes.
Member of Sycamore Land Trust, I pay my dues.
Yes.
And for many years, I was attorney for Sycamore Land Trust, but I've been retired going on 9 years now. I don't feel that either of those things constitutes a conflict of interest or creates a bias. On the other hand, I intend to participate in this, but if anybody thinks that's unwise or inappropriate or illegal, I would appreciate their chiming in.
No. I'm glad to have you on the board. Do you have any objections, Skip?
That's a personal decision whether you recuse yourself.
Like 9 years, really.
Right. Okay, very good.
Yeah, I don't see any conflict or perceived conflict at all.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for.
Lots of us are members.
You could end up with somebody impossible to vote because everybody would be disqualified.
If you go overboard, we'll reconsider.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Yeah. Oh, but do members of the BZA have questions for staff? I don't. Okay, so Ms. Moss, it's good to see you again. And thank you for your patience once again in sitting through these meetings. And please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. So just kind of wanted to run through these again and kind of tell you what our perception on these is. To begin with, I'm going to lump kind of all of the landscaping together. So the buffer yards and the streetscape. What we're looking at is an extremely large parcel that is being set aside primarily as a preserve. They are working through a conservation easement. It is in state review. That is in conjunction with DNR. As soon as DNR approves that, that'll be a recorded easement for the portion that Ann had up there. That's basically everything except for the little knoll that the house sits on and where these improvements are going on. Everything else is going to be preserved. It's supposed to stay natural. When you start planting groups of planting in accordance with an ordinance, it starts kind of taking away from the natural look of things. Additionally, along those streetscapes, it would create a barrier to viewing this really gorgeous area out there. Some of the aerial images that we have right now don't even do it justice. It's absolutely gorgeous out there. I'm amazed at all the stuff I see every time I go by there. So putting in some of that streetscape is going to deter and detract from those natural views, which are going to help draw people into the nature center. So we really feel that it detracts from the purpose that they're trying to achieve with the property. As far as the buffer yards go, most of the buffer yard areas are actually, those property lines are following either natural streams or there's Knoxville Lake area as well. So these have a riparian buffer to them, and to fit within the buffer yard requirements, it's just going to be hard. If we were to go out there and try to count all of those trees, it would take someone forever to count and measure. And if you're not really familiar with the D-value calculation, it's not just counting the trees, it's actually measuring the diameter of those trees as well. It's a bit excessive, but at the same time, we don't want to be in violation. So asking for this variance just kind of covers our bases on those areas. On our parking surface, this facility is going to be used primarily 2 to 3 times a week. It's not an everyday place. It's not going to have super high traffic loads all the time. Most of the time that parking lot's going to be vacant. By having an asphalt lot, we're really introducing additional pollutants right next to a conservation area. The petroleum runoff from an asphalt parking lot is really not what we're looking for. Gravel, although over time it does lose some of its infiltration abilities, does retain more infiltration abilities than any of our pervious or impervious materials. So a pure concrete parking lot. Water's not soaking into that. It also is going to get hot during the summer. Your gravel is not going to get as hot. It's also going to allow some infiltration. It keeps with the intent of this facility and this property. We do have a bus parking spot, and because of the higher load of the bus parking there, as well as safety of kids getting out of that bus and walking, we have decided to concrete that area. The entrance drive has a little bit of a steeper slope, so we want to make sure that that is concrete to avoid any washout of the gravel. As Ann pointed out, all of this does drain into a bioswale, bioretention area that does have our perimeter parking plantings in it. Additionally, our accessible parking is up near the facility on the existing drive, and that is a concrete surface. When we look at the buildable area issue, Ann alluded to the idea that we submitted for the variances before submitting the site plan. There was a little bit of purpose in that. When we originally submitted and when this all started, the mapping for that, all that purple area, actually covered that whole thing. Like that map would have been the blue stripes and the purple stripes completely. I went back and forth with the state. I know my clients had touched base with the state a few times. And the state was like, we're not changing the mapping. We know it doesn't match up. A clarification on that. So your purple mapping on there is the DNR approximate floodway. The blue line mapping is actually the FEMA floodway. So that is what you would typically go to get a LOMA or a LOMAR for. You don't get a LOMA or a LOMA for the DNR mapping because FEMA doesn't acknowledge it. They only acknowledge their mapping. Their mapping actually corresponds with the base flood elevations that the DNR has published, and they acknowledge the base flood elevations. Their map doesn't completely reflect it. After I filed for the variance, Tammy actually contacted me and said, have you looked at the map today? And she and I kind of went back and forth trying to download the FARA because somewhere along the line the DNR changed their mind and decided to modify it some, but they didn't completely take it back to that FEMA level, and that's where we are. We're still encroaching on their mapping a bit, but we are outside of that FEMA mapping, and we are above that BFE. But when that was all purple, we actually would have needed a variance to the floodplain ordinance to even have this use, to function at all, to do anything. And so my concern at the time was that if we went through full design, we have to apply, we're going through the state for a septic permit, all of that. If we went through all of that without getting that variance, it could all be for naught. And so the way it's set up, it makes more sense to apply for all our variances in one bunch. And so that's what we did, is apply for them beforehand, because that was a little less risk to apply for those up front. As I said, it's shifted a little bit because we don't need that floodplain variance, but we do that transitioned into this buildable area for the parking. It's only a portion of the parking lot that is in that purple shaded area, but it is outside of the blue lined area, which is your FEMA floodway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do members of the BZA have questions for Ms. Moss? I
do. How many spots are planned to be in your 7,000 foot? Usually about 8 per 1,000 foot, right?
Yeah, I think we're at about 20, if I recall. Let me make sure.
Only 20 total spots?
So, no, that's not right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Closer to 50, I would imagine.
12, 13, 15, 16, 17.
Looks like
We have
30?
About 30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only 30 spots?
Yeah. Yeah. So our parking, based on discussions with planning, there's not a specific requirement for the number of parking for this. What we went on was their highest capacity for parking would actually be for a board meeting. So we took a percentage of the board members to assign, because some of them will come together, to determine that maximum parking requirement. Most of the time we're anticipating a busload of kids and a handful of chaperones. So even on days we're using this, that parking lot's not going to be full. It's really going to be full a few times a year.
And then you also have the disabled parking.
Yes, we have two.
Yes.
We have those spots up near the facility.
Yes. Do you, frankly, I'm excited about this education center and this agri-tourism center, and I agree that your efforts are improving the stability of the natural area and you're preserving the things that are special. But that being said, we're going to hear from the public, and we're going to see if there's anyone in favor of this petition to please come forward. You have up to 3 minutes. Have you signed in already? Okay, so if you would kindly raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
And if you would kindly state your name and...
So my name is Devin Blankenship, and I am a neighbor at a diagonal property from this property. A few things I want to say just in support of what's here is it's great to see this kind of center coming to our area. Sycamore Land Trust is a great neighbor to have. I'm a native of the Bean Blossom Valley. I remember the toxic ash dump discussion. So I'm very glad that this is a discussion we're having now instead. One thing I do want to point out is that some of the traditional planting requirements and things like that in our area would look kind of manufactured anyway. And so by them having the natural landscape, that's going to blend in a lot more with the existing area. And it's actually going to keep the property looking more like one of the neighborhood properties. So that's one thing I'm excited about and excited to see. As far as the floodplain goes, and I know I'm not a hydrologist, I have never seen the water that high in my 41 and a half years of living in northern Monroe County. If that parking lot floods, we have a much larger community problem than that parking lot flooding. So I want to let it be known that that I support the permeable surface gravel lot. And when I think about buses pulling up there, there's bus drivers across the street. So it's very normal for us to see buses parked in driveways in rural northern Monroe County. So that's also natural site as well. I think all in all, their plan seems like it's going to blend in very well with the existing use around the area. And I'm glad to see that they've thought about all sorts of different situations when it comes to things like parking area and things like that. So I'm just here to speak in support.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Blankenship. I'm going to see if there's anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this petition. either here in person or online? Or is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the petition? I see no one, so we come back to us for further discussion and/or a motion.
Prior to anyone's motion, the requester has made their case for all but one, so I'd like to sever variance 23-49 Bravo.
No, I think they did, they asked for gravel.
I think he said B, he meant B, Bravo.
B, Bravo, correct.
Off-street parking surfacing variance. I thought they covered that.
They didn't fit the criterion. So I'm asking to sever that so we can approve the other parts.
Oh, so you would like to discuss B separate? Okay.
Yes.
I don't have an objection to that. We can go ahead and then have our discussion for 2349A, C, and D. And I would
A, C, and D.
A, C, and D.
Yeah, he doesn't want B.
And then we'll discuss B afterwards.
I move we approve variances 2349A, C, and D for 6511 North Old State Road 37.
Is that because you think that the standards variance would actually improve the stability of the natural area and that it would preserve the character of the property and the neighboring properties, and that it preserves the value of adjacent property, and that that it's the minimum variance needed in order to eliminate practical difficulties?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay. So this is for variances A, C, and D.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve VAR 2349A, landscaping buffer yard, C, buildable area, special flood hazard area variance to chapter 804, D, landscaping variance streetscape to chapter 830. A vote yes is a vote to approve the 3 variances. Guy Loftman,
Yes.
D. Owens,
Yes.
Pamela Davidson,
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
Skip Daly.
Yes.
Okay, the motion is approved, 5-0.
And then there is the 2349B. Mr. Daly, can you review with us your concerns?
Well, the concern is the number of spaces that they're asking for should fit well within the existing allowed gravel lot, which is 4,000 square feet. And they're requesting an additional amount at that point, which poses a potential risk in the environment, especially considering it's wavering on a FEMA flood zone, and they haven't met their criterion on the need versus the potential danger. So I motion that we deny variance 23-49 Bravo on the basis that it does not fulfill all the criterion.
And I would like to turn to my colleagues for any other discussion and/or a second of the motion. To deny. Okay, so there's no discussion and no second.
I'm glad you raised that point. I am. I understand from the evidence, the testimony, that the lot size is really determined by a rare maximum event, which is a board meeting, or there'll be a donor reception or something out there. Let's be honest about that. So I can understand that they will need at least that amount of space. So that I find it a justifiable exception, particularly given how remote this property is.
They mentioned needing 30 spots.
Right.
And we allot for gravel 4,000 square feet at 8 spots per 1,000 square feet, which is standard. That's your 32 right there. There's no call for the variance in with the potential environmental risk. They testified that way. We can't pick and choose what we want to have happen. We have a set of criteria for which we have to follow, and that's the way I have to vote.
I heard something different, but I respect what you're saying.
Just to clarify, this variance request is for the surfacing.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that you approved 49C buildable area, it would actually, by denying it, you would be allowing them to surface it with asphalt. So the choices now are asphalt versus gravel. So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, so the motion did not have a second. So is there
I have a clarifying question. You said the choice is asphalt or gravel. They're allowed 4,000 square feet of gravel. Is that not correct?
That's correct, but the 7,000 square feet was included in the buildable area to the floodplain. So there could be 4,000 square feet gravel, 3,000 square feet asphalt.
Sure, they could put a semi-permeable type situation in there. Just not something that's going to have the potential runoff, but yeah.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Daly, if through the technicalities that your concerns were not adequately addressed.
Well, I think the county's concerns were not adequately addressed.
Yes.
And then when I made the motion, you asked for discussion as opposed to allowing someone to second,
Yes.
which was,
Okay, well, could I ask for a second to your original motion to deny? Is that what? Yes, I will ask. So,
you're the chair.
yeah, there's no, I don't believe there's a second.
I do not second it.
I don't either. So is there another motion?
I'm going to move that we accept variance 23-49B for Sycamore Land Trust off-street parking with surfacing variance to Chapter 806.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve VAR-23-49B, which is the off-street parking surfacing variance to Chapter 806. A vote yes is a vote to approve. Dee Owens?
Yes.
Pamela Davidson?
Yes.
Margaret Clemens?
Yes.
Skip Daly?
No.
Guy Loftman?
Yes.
Okay, that variance passes 4-1.
You're consistent.
Well, for the record, I'm not against what they're doing here. I just, I have criterion, and
Yes.
we all do, and hopefully you
I
voted with your
appreciate you.
conscience.
I appreciate you, and I learned from you. So thank you, everyone, for your patience in this long meeting tonight, and thank you for your good efforts, your good presentations by staff, your good homework. Thank you, and your good deeds. Have a good evening. Have a good evening. Yes, the meeting is adjourned.
To drive out there and look at that.